Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for being with us today. My name is Danielle Lund and I serve as Associate Director of Digital Engagement for the Alumnae Association at Mount Holyoke. Our work at the Alumnae Association is all about supporting connections and providing meaningful resources and opportunities for members of the Mount Holyoke community. I want to share that registered for today's session are 65 community members with alums and students ranging from the classes of the 1960s through the 2020s. We're so glad to be with you all. And for those who cannot join live, we are recording and will post to the Alumnae Association's website within a few days of the event. We'd like to remind that no other recording of this event is permitted without prior written approval. Should you have questions throughout the event, please include them in the chat found in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll address as many as we can at the close of the presentation. Just another reminder that we are recording, so if you prefer that your voice not appear in the recording, to use the chat feature. We're happy to have with us today Erin McCoy Alarcon, an alum of the class of 1998, to share with us about techniques for handling conflict at home and work. Erin is an attorney and mediator practicing in Eastern Massachusetts and New Hampshire. She's passionate about guiding people through challenging conversations and helping them find common ground and winning solutions. Her mediation practice, Erin Alarcon Mediation, focuses mainly on family, employment, and organizational disputes. Welcome, Erin. Thank you for being with us today. I am now going to turn things over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. It's really great to be with you. I am going to share my presentation with you all and get started. So our agenda today is going to be, we're going to go through why we discuss conflict management, why it's important, what the root causes of conflict management are, or of conflict are, what a facilitative model that is interest focused looks like for handling conflicts, techniques for exploring interests within that framework of a facilitative model, option generating and solutioning, and then we'll talk about some pointers, some more pointers and some examples. And then there'll be time for Q&A. Before we dive in though, I'd like, Danielle, could you bring up the first poll question?
Absolutely.
So how do you react to conflict? I'm curious to know, do you avoid it? Do you like to bury your head in the sand and hope it goes away? You like a fight, or you see it as an opportunity to solve a problem? Give a few more seconds for answers. I'll tell you that for me personally, I hate conflict, which people think is really weird because I do this every day and I love working with people and mediating and helping them move forward through conflict. But for me personally, I would really like to just bury my head in my pillow and hope that it goes away, but that's not really practical or a healthy way to handle it. And so actually being a mediator and exploring conflict management strategies has really been helpful for me in a personal way too. So I think we're ready to, it looks like from the polling that, yeah, this is not uncommon that almost half of you like to avoid it. There's a couple in there that like to have a good fight, and I'm really excited to see that some of you have already taken that step to seeing it as a way to, an opportunity to resolve a problem. So why do we discuss conflict management? Well, as you can see from this, it's part of our lives and we all have different ways of handling it. And there are some ways that are maybe more healthier in dealing with conflict than others. When people ask me how I got into conflict management, the kind of formal response is, well, I was practicing as an attorney, litigating, dealing with conflict with, clients who are arguing in some way or another with other folks for years. And I saw the way that mediation and other forms of conflict management could really benefit and really did benefit my clients. And could be very helpful. And so I decided to take some classes and start training and learning how to be a mediator myself, starting in 2009. But the real answer is that all of us experience conflict every single day, pretty much from the minute we're born. If you think back to your toddlerhood, that first time that somebody took a toy that you were playing with or asked, wanted something that you had, or your parents wanted you to wear certain clothes and you wanted to wear something else. Those are all examples of conflicts. And the type of conflicts that we deal with on a daily basis can range from really, rather mundane things like what to wear or what to eat, to, pretty substantial things that can really impact our entire lives going forward. Conflict resolution, a new way to think about it, other than conflict, because conflict is unavoidable, we also want to talk about this because there are a lot of emotional costs involved in conflict in our lives. And the emotional costs end up playing into physical costs of conflict-related stress. And I'm sure that none of this is a surprise to any of you, that these physical costs can lead to lower immunity, it can lead to lack of focus, it can lead to anxiety, and it can lead to a decrease in mood. And this is really cyclical. So as you get more anxious and your mood drops, it can actually affect people around you. And then that creates more conflict, which then creates additional anxiety and a decrease in mood. So if there's really any cycle that benefits us all as a society to break out of, it's that conflict stress cycle. And then the last reason is the monetary costs. And the most common monetary cost that we think of is, attorney's fees. So if you have an argument that just is, you can't get through it and people end up hiring attorneys, that's really costly. But there can be other monetary costs too. For example, in divorce, it can mean a decrease in divorce. We like to think of things, or I like to think of things in terms of the family estate. And so if there's a lot of conflict and it's drawn out, we can actually see situations where the entire estate experiences a decrease in monetary value because, for example, we couldn't reach an agreement on selling the house. When the market was really high, the market decreases and now we get less money for the house, things like that. So Danielle, can you pull up the second poll? So I'm curious if any of you have ever had any formal conflict resolution training. It looks like the vast majority of you, around 85%, have not had any, which is not surprising. This is not something, it's not usually part of our education in school, and it's not something that is really readily available for everybody. For those of you who have had some formal conflict resolution training, probably these things that we're going to talk about today are not, there's nothing in here that's going to be surprising for you, but hopefully it'll be a good refresher for you and give you some things to continue thinking about and think about practicing again as you go forward. For those of you who haven't, this is going to be a really broad overview of conflict resolution strategies. And some tips and techniques to use. We just don't have time today to go really deep into everything, but my hope is that I'll give you some tools for your proverbial toolbox to take with you every day, whether it's at work, at home, wherever you're going. And that as you continue to try to put these things into practice, you'll get better and better at it, and maybe pick up a book here and there, maybe, or watch some other videos to continue growing your skills in this area. So what are the root causes of conflict? There's really 3 buckets. The first bucket is unmet basic needs. So this bucket is going to include things like the sense of belonging, balance of power, freedom, and fun. Balance of power is one that we see a lot in conflicts between parents and children, or particularly parents and teenagers. The second one is going to be limited resources. And so this is going to include time, money, and property. And oftentimes this is what the biggest, when I'm working with families, particularly in divorce mediation situations, this is often where the biggest amount of friction occurs. Time, talking about coming up with a parenting plan, and then money and property, child support, and splitting up the family estate. And then the third bucket, and perhaps the most challenging bucket to work through, is different values. So this is where we find people have different priorities, they have different principles, and they have different beliefs. I really like this quote by Albert Einstein, that in the middle of difficulty lies opportunities, because I feel that this is a really great illustration of what the goal overall, and personally for me, the goal of conflict resolution and management skills is. I'm always trying to help people take something from what looks like a really binary win-lose situation and see it in a more expansive way and figure out how we can make this a win-win situation. And so I often will myself come back to this quote and think about this. There's some difficult stuff going on, but where are the things, what can we learn from this, and where are the places that we can find some opportunities here? Danielle, would you pull up the third poll, please?
Yep.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty here, I'm wondering, in what setting did you last experience a disagreement? So it looks like about 2/3 experience it at home and a third work-related. Before the pandemic, I think that these were often, I would see, anecdotally, I would see it be a little more even. But what's happening, and what I've been experiencing in talking with my clients, is that actually a lot of, with the pandemic and more people doing home, work from home and school from home, that we're really blending the lines between home and work. And what may seem, what may start as a work conflict actually ends up being some kind of home conflict. For example, if you're at home and you're having a hard time focusing and getting the work done because there's a lot of distractions at home and you have to take care of children, or maybe there are actual bandwidth issues with having multiple people on the internet, that it comes up initially as a work issue, but it actually feels like more of a home issue. So I'm not surprised to see that this is the outcome. And hopefully you'll have some takeaways from today that can help manage all of that. So our techniques, when we look at a facilitative model for mediation and conflict management, this idea of moving from win-lose to win-win, the way we want to do this is by identifying 5 things. The first thing we need to identify is, what's the issue? So this is really like, what's the problem here? So for example, if you have, going back to the struggles with getting work done and taking care of children, maybe there's a struggle between 2 co-parents in a household about how are we going to manage helping the kids do school while also getting our work done. That's the issue. How do we do this? the next thing under the issue that we want to identify is what are the positions? So the positions are what's everybody want? And so one co-parent may say, well, I need other co-parent to take care of everything so that I can focus on doing my work. And it may be the opposite for the other co-parent. Those are the positions that you start with. But really, when we get into being able to find ways to resolve things, it's when we get to the interest under the positions, and that's the why. Why do I feel like I need to, why do I feel like I need to be the one that is not being distracted by anything and have somebody else do all the parenting so that I can just focus on work, or vice versa. Once we explore, and the techniques, most of what we're going to be talking today is going to be techniques for getting to those interests, because sometimes people know what the issue is. They know what their position is, but don't really understand themselves why that's the position. And so this is where we use these techniques to help people and ourselves be really vulnerable and open about why it is that we're feeling and wanting the things we are feeling and wanting. It's only after you talk about interests and get all the interests on the table that you start talking about options. And we will talk a little bit later about what option generation looks like. And then finally, we come to solutions. And that's really the last step. And while there may be some fluidity between identifying what people's positions are and what their interests are and possible options, this is really a pretty linear framework, because if you don't understand positions, interests, and you don't really have all of the possible options out there, it's really hard to find a solution. So the techniques that we're going to be talking about today are active listening, which I'm sure that you've heard of and probably have experienced in practice before, reframing, and reality testing. And before we get into the details of those, I have one more poll question that, Danielle, if you would pull that up for us.
Yep, give me just 1 second.
So the last argument that you remember having with someone had to do with what? And these are some of the most common ones: money, time, feeling excluded or neglected, a desire for recognition, political beliefs, religious beliefs, or something else. I'll tell you, for me, the last time was political, and that's one of the hardest ones. It's a pretty good split here, but it looks like feeling excluded or neglected and a desire for recognition are the two most common amongst this group. Followed, and also something else that isn't in this list, and then followed behind by political beliefs, and then money. And I think this is a pretty nice little bell curve here, which actually represents what's going on right now, not just now, but all times, in terms of, especially in families, what kind of conflicts that we have. And goes back to those root causes that we talked about earlier. So let's talk about active listening. So one of the first things that you have to do to be an active listener is display empathy. And it has to be real, genuine empathy. You want to be providing audible and visible affirmations for people. And the thing is, and this is especially true when you're talking to teenagers, is that they pick up on it if it's not genuine, right? So this is not just about listening to somebody else. Conflict resolution and conflict management in general is not just about listening to what other people are saying, knowing what you want yourself, and then trying to convince somebody. This is about making yourself really vulnerable too in the situation, so that you can say, okay, I'm going to put aside how I'm feeling about this at this moment, and I am just going to listen and hear what they're telling me. And whether I agree or not, I'm going to take off my judgment cap and put that down and not think about that right now, or try as best as I can to not think about that right now. And I am going to try to really understand what they're saying. So as I'm listening without interrupting, I'm going to be, nodding my head. I'm going to be saying, okay, tell me more, little things to let them know I really want to hear what you're saying. You also want to ask open-ended questions and convey genuine curiosity to the people or the person that you're talking to. So if you're trying to get to those underlying interests, so let's say, for example, your teenager says, I don't think it's fair that you give me a curfew. As parents, we may be like, thinking, that's ridiculous. Of course you get a curfew. You're the kid. But to reach some kind of resolution, or to at least to minimize the amount of conflict between a parent and a child, it's really important that we as parents are modeling to the children the same kind of behavior that we want them to mirror back to us. And that starts with the active listening with empathy and open-ended questions. So instead of saying, asking a question to your child that kind of leads to the answer that you think your kid should be giving back to you, you want to ask something that leaves it wide open. But you also need to be aware and prepare yourself that you may ask a question and not like the answer that you're going to get. And so this goes along with part of the modeling and hoping for mirroring back, is that you prepare yourself internally that I may ask my kid or my coworker something. I have to be ready. I might hear something that I don't like. I might hear something that hurts me. And I have to be ready to be vulnerable and open myself about how I'm feeling. And also to say, okay, that is hard for me to hear, but I want to know more. So tell me more about why you're feeling that way or why you think that way. And then finally, I went too far. Finally, you want to be able to summarize the main point back to the speaker. And active listening, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So you are having a conversation with someone. These aren't linear things. You don't start with empathy and then move to open-ended questions. You're going to be weaving back and forth through all of these things. So you may have a conversation with your child about, say, the curfew issue. And your child may be saying to you, I just don't think it's fair. Other people are out later. I'd like to have a little more freedom. I'd like to be able to have some say in the decision. And you at some point are going to say, okay, so I'm hearing that it's really important to you that you have some more autonomy. And maybe actually you're giving back to them exactly what they're telling you, but they say, no, wait, no, actually, that's not what I'm feeling or thinking. And then you go back into asking those questions, right? And this is what I was talking about before, where people are pretty clear on what their positions are, but sometimes people don't know what their interests are. And so we, as the people who are trying to model a healthy conflict management and resolution technique for people, we need to be willing and able to say, okay, so I heard what you were saying, but it sounds to me like maybe you need to spend some more time thinking. Would it be helpful for you to spend some more time thinking about why you want this, and kind of start back the conversation back over again? The second technique is reframing. Now, reframing is probably one of the most helpful things that you can do in a conversation with somebody, especially if you're talking to someone who's pretty negative or really focused on the way things have always happened in the past and can't seem to get their head out of that idea that because it was this way before, it's always going to be that way in the future. But reframing is also one of the most difficult things. It takes a lot of practice. And for me, it's one of the things that I find very useful, but I also have to really work at it to find new ways to reframe conversations. So what is reframing? Well, reframing is without changing the underlying meaning of an idea, you want to present a thought in a way that's more conducive to resolution. So, for example, if I say one night to my family, I never been able to get enough sleep because I always have to clean up after everyone at night. There's a few little things in this sentence that are going to be keys to you, the person hearing this, that maybe this is something that you need to try to reframe for the person. Because when you hear things that are extremes, I've never been able to get enough sleep and I always have to clean up. Those are extreme things, and you want to reframe, help somebody reframe from thinking in the extreme into a more collaborative and way that's going to help reach some kind of an agreement, help them see it a little bit differently. So maybe if I'm the partner for this person, it gets reframed as, yeah, I hear you. Good sleep is important for all of us. So if we all chipped in a little bit, maybe we could all go to bed at a decent hour. If I heard that, I'd say, yeah, that sounds great. Now, how do we make it happen, right? Or maybe I hear myself saying, I've never been able to get enough sleep. I always have to clean up after everybody. And then I think, wait a minute, maybe I need to reframe the way I'm thinking about this. And so when I reframe for myself, and so instead of actually saying that first sentence to people, I might say to them, okay, listen, guys, I really need my sleep. We all do. If everybody could just help out 15 minutes before bed, we could all go to bed at 10 o'clock and we'd all be a lot happier. What do you guys think? And start the questions, the conversation that way. So now I've reframed for myself the way I was thinking about it, so that now I'm going into the conversation not so much as accusing other people, but more as, hey, I want to work with you guys to make this work. Reframing is really helpful in situations where you're trying to switch somebody's focus from the past to the present, and where you're trying to move them away from blame and towards more responsibility. And then the last technique that we're going to be talking about is reality testing. I think reality testing is really helpful for testing people's assumptions and making sure that they really understand what it is that they're saying, but doing it in a way that's not attacking them or really judging them. It's really getting them to kind of evaluate what they're saying themselves. So reality testing is helping people see the issue through another lens. And you do it by helping people explore their strengths and weaknesses in their arguments, what they're saying. You use objectivity with them and try and invite them to use objectivity, and then evaluating what the worst and the best case scenario is if you don't reach an agreement. So for example, if I'm meeting with somebody in a divorce mediation and one of the parents says, my ex-spouse doesn't spend enough time with the kids, my reality testing response to them is probably going to be, how much time would your spouse say they spend with the kids? Because the question here is, it could be that both of them are thinking, I don't get enough time with the kids. Or they both could be thinking of it in a more negative, the other person doesn't want to spend enough time with the kid, right? So what we want them to do is start putting themselves in the shoes of the other people and think about, well, how are they saying it? And a lot of times the way reality testing ends up working is that people will start thinking about it. When I say, how much time would your ex-spouse say they spend with the kids? And they're like, oh, well, of course they're going to say that they spend tons of time with their kid. And then I go back, because none of this is linear, it's all fluid. I go back to the active listening and I say, okay, so tell me more. Why do you think that you think they don't spend enough, but they think that they do? Well, there's, up with all sorts of issues. Maybe there's an issue of being a little bit late for picking somebody up, or maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the parents, and it's actually about the teenagers who have their own cars now and are and jobs, and they're doing a lot. And one spouse is our ex-spouse is feeling like, I really wish my teenager could spend more time with their other parent. And it's really a genuine thing. It can also be, maybe that one of the kids just has that default parent that they always go to. And especially when they're older and the kids can move themselves around. So maybe, instead of walking home to dad's house on Wednesday, like the schedule is, maybe they had a bad day and they walk to mom's house, and then mom's feeling like, I just need a break, right? So there are lots of different reasons, and using reality, reality testing, we can bring people back to what the objective view of things are. Reality testing is really good for testing assumptions, and it's good for naming emotions and what their impact is. So, one way, if somebody's saying my spouse doesn't spend enough time with the kids, I might say, okay, I hear frustration. Yeah, name the frustration. How much time do you think your spouse would say? How do you think your spouse is feeling, your ex-spouse is feeling about this? And then once you use the reality testing to help people see their own emotions and how it's impacting their decision making and how someone else might be feeling, kind of putting themselves in somebody else's shoes, like we talked about with and reframing things so that they can look at it, blame thing. This is a let's come up with a lot more options, more ideas thing, that maybe it diffuses those emotions. And reality testing, ultimately, our goal is to help people learn how to distinguish from what's real and what isn't real. So once you've gone through you've identified what the issue is. You've talked about what the position is. You've gone through and you think you figured out what everybody's interests are. This is why I feel or I want the thing that I do. Now it's time to get into option generating. And these are really two different things. So let's start with option generating. Don't start option generating until all the interests are defined. And this is really important because when we are option generating, what we're trying to do is we're looking at, here is the circle that is full of the interests of person A. Here's the circle that's full of all the interests of person B. And we want to come up with all the possible options so that when we come up with a solution, it's a solution that's going to cover interests of both. We don't want, there might not be everything that can be covered, but we want this to be the most connected Venn diagram at the end of the day that we can come up with. And if we don't understand all the interests, that's going to limit our options. Option generating is also a no judgment zone, which I think is the hardest thing to do in option generating, especially when you're talking to someone and their options seem really out there. But you got to take the judgment hat off and just say, okay, we're talking about ideas right now. This is a brainstorming session and anything goes. We are going to be totally out of the box in the way that we're thinking, and we're going to put everything on the table that we can. And we're not going to worry at this stage of the game about evaluating any of it, right? So take, for an example, a situation where you have two kids that have to share a bedroom and they are just butting heads all the time now. And you're trying to figure out with them, you parent as mediator to these kids, what can we do so that they can live in here and not drive me nuts and not be at each other's throats all the time. And it's, so you're going through what all of the issues are between the two of them, what they both want, why they want it, why are they so upset with each other all the time. And finally you get to option generating, and you're sitting down at the table with them. You're like, all right, come on guys, let's hear it. How can we resolve this issue? And one of your kids says, it's easy. We're just going to build a tiny house in the backyard. That's fine. I'll live there. So on first thought, you may hear that, and your initial thought is, okay, that's nuts, right? I'm not buying you and building you a tiny house in the backyard. But this isn't the time to put that judgment out there, because by putting that out there, you shut down the option generating, and you don't know what's going to come next. And you also don't know if there might be some way that is actually a possible solution. So you say, okay, you take out a piece of paper and you start writing down, or someone takes out their phone and their notes, and you start writing down all the possible options that come out. Once you have them all, now you're going to start talking about solutioning. So you finished option generating. You think you have every possible thing in the entire world that you could come up with and put out there for a possible solution. And now you're going to be kind and open-minded, and you're going to use all the techniques that we talked about already. You're now going to go back and use active listening and reframing and reality testing, and be really open-minded about the options. And as you're doing that together, you're going to evaluate what options will best meet all interests, right? So let's go back to the example of the kids that are butting heads and they just want their own space. And one kid says, we're gonna buy a tiny house and put it outside. And as you're listening, this meets the interests of, they don't want to share a room anymore, right? It separates them, so it meets that interest. But it's not going to be practical because you don't have the space or the money or the zoning to make it work, right? So you go back to some of their other interests. And the other teenager says, well, I really like buildings. What if I built a partition in the room so that we would actually have separate space? Well, maybe that's an option. So tell me more. This is where the active listening comes in. Tell me more, kid. How's that going to look? What's it going to cost? What kind of materials are you going to need? Look at the other kid. What do you think of that? How would that work for you? And now you're listening to them. And ideally, especially in parenting situations, but this also holds true if you are a manager in a workplace, talking with two employees who don't get along, you are going to get the most buy-in to a solution. And on average, the most lasting solution when the people come up with the solution themselves. So if you are acting as the mediator, you want these folks to be having the conversation themselves. And at the end of the day, if you don't have, the best mediations I have are the ones where I get midway through and the people are talking to each other, and I'm just there to kind of monitor and put out some prodding, probing questions as we go along to keep the conversation going, and also make sure that people don't say things, to kind of pull things back if somebody does say something that's hurtful to the other person. And that's what you want to do with your kids, and that's what you want to do with your coworkers. And hopefully at the end, you've gone through all of these steps. It's not a quick and easy fix. It's going to take time and effort, but you get to the end and you have two people or more than two people, maybe two groups of people that are saying, okay, I can live with this. This isn't what I wanted or thought I wanted at the start, but this is something that it checks off the box of these needs. It checks off the boxes of why I need these things. And I can live with it. I can make it work. Okay, so a couple other tips that I wanted to provide to you before I provide a couple more examples and then open it up for Q&A. How do you deal with irrational people? The caveat to this is that for situations that involve any kind of violence or threat of violence, so this is domestic, workplace, any kind of violence or threat of violence, and any true mental health concerns, don't handle it yourself. Seek professional assistance. But in any other situation, the best way to handle irrational people is, someone who's they're just dug in on their argument and they are just not willing to listen to reason. Address only the issue and completely disengage the irrational part of whatever they're saying to you. This is hard. I acknowledge that it's really hard to do this. So I'll give you an example, a couple examples. At home, your kid says, if you give me your curfew, I won't have any friends anymore. Okay, so the I won't have any friends anymore is sad, that your child might think that, but it's also probably not realistic that that's actually what's going to happen. And it also may be a little manipulative of a child, and teenagers sometimes can be manipulative, saying that to us. So what do? Okay, you acknowledge the pain that is potentially within that irrational statement. I'm sorry to hear that you feel like you wouldn't have any friends anymore. You don't fight it. You don't fight back about it. You just acknowledge it. And then you focus solely on the issue. What's the issue here? Curfew or no curfew, and what's the curfew going to be? And then you get back into the tips that we already talked about. And every time they try to go off on that irrational part, you pull them right back into talking about what the issue is. If you're at work and you're a manager and you're having some kind of discussion or argument with an employee, and the employee says, if you don't give me a raise right this second, I'll quit on the spot. Again, quitting on the spot, you hope somebody's not going to do it. It's probably not a really, reasonable response to whatever is going on. So you want to acknowledge whatever pain or emotions are in that. I hear you're frustrated. I hope you won't quit on the spot. Talk to me about what makes you feel like you deserve a raise. I want to hear more about what you've done to merit a raise. What would a raise look like to you? And going back again to the techniques that we talked about earlier. And finally, if all else fails, take a break. There is no shame in saying, I need a break. One of the most important things that we can do when we are involved in conflict personally, and when we are helping other people deal with conflict, is to be aware of our own feelings and emotions and physical well-being. So if you are in a situation, whether it's your personal conflict that you're dealing with, or you're helping somebody, you're mediating, so to speak, and you start to feel you're getting an upset stomach, your heart is starting to race, you're sweating, you're feeling flushed, all those things that let us know, hey, your brain is telling your body, hey, we're not really happy with the way things are going right now, and we're feeling a little scared or nervous or angry. It's okay to have those emotions. We just need to acknowledge it. And so it's totally okay to say to people, I need to take a break. We are at an impasse right now, and we're getting frustrated, and that's not going to help. So why don't we take 5? I, as a mediator in mediation, have said to people, we're at an impasse. I can sense you guys getting really frustrated. I'm getting frustrated myself, and I don't want to be frustrated because I can't help you if I'm frustrated. So why don't we all go take a break, go for a walk, go get a glass of water, whatever you need to do. Sometimes the break that you need to take is going to be 5 minutes. Sometimes it might be lunch. I've definitely done that with people in mediations where I've said, let's just take an early lunch and we can all regroup. And sometimes the break might be a day or more. Now, there's this old adage about not going to bed early. I do not like to go to bed early. There's an old adage about not going to bed angry. I do not like to go to bed angry. I don't sleep well. I'm thinking about those things. But sometimes you have to go to bed. It just doesn't make sense to be arguing about whatever it is you're arguing about late into the night. And also, the more sleep that we have, or the well-rested we are, the better position that we're in to handle conflict. And so the later that we stay up arguing with somebody over something, and we're just, at loggerhead, we just can't work it out, the less likely actually it will be that we will work it out because we're getting really tired and then more frustrated and the cycle continues. And so sometimes you have to be willing to say, I disagree with you. I'm not happy right now, but I think we both need to go to sleep. We need to get some rest. Can we set a time tomorrow to talk about this some more? And then that's the key, is making sure, especially for the 50% of us, going back to the poll, that said, hey, I like to ignore conflict. I don't like it. It's really important for us to say, hey, let's take a break, but let's set a time when we're going to talk about this tomorrow. Or if it's in a mediation, if it's at work, set up a time to resume the conversation. And it's setting that time in a way that works for everybody involved, right? So you don't want to be saying, let's set up a time to talk about this at 7 a.m. tomorrow, knowing that the other person can't be there and be present, both emotionally and mentally be present. You want it to work for everybody. So don't be afraid to take a break. I thought I would go through a couple little pointers, little examples that kind of touch on the fluidity of the techniques that we've talked about, and then open it up for some question and answer. So before we do that, the things that I hope that you'll take away from this webinar is that you really, in terms of trying to move conflict along, you want to look at it and move from a win-lose to a win-win situation. You don't want to look at it in terms of, pie that is set in a discrete amount. You want to look at something that is expansive. And the way you do that is you identify your issues, positions, and interests. You use your active listening skills, your reframing skills, and your reality testing. Then you come up with as many options as you can, and then you evaluate solutions. And if you need to, you go back to other parts. If you need to come up with more understanding about interests, or you need more options to be generated, it's a cyclical process and very fluid. Make sure you're only engaging the issue. Don't engage with the irrational comments. And when in doubt, take a break. So a couple examples that I wanted to share with you. And these may ring familiar to some of you. So let's say we have a parent who is a professional musician and has to practice the piano, which is in the middle of the living room, a certain number of hours each day, and a kid doing home remote learning. And they're really having a hard time with it because parent says, I need to practice. I'm at my best between this hour and this hour. I need to practice that many hours during those hours. And the child says, I can't do my work when you're practicing, right? And so you're trying, now there's another parent, the other parent is coming in and trying to mediate this. Like, how do we make this work? Because going to some other place to practice at the moment is not an option. Doing school somewhere else isn't an option. And both of the things do need to happen. This is a situation where, this is similar, some of the facts here have been changed, but similar to a true situation where I suggested to a family that they find a time in the evening before people are tired, if it's around the dinner table or just after dinner, where they sit down to have a conversation and they make sure that they don't have any phones or distractions near them. And the questions you're going to start with are going to be really open-ended. And so parent, the professional musician parent, talk to the child, not to the mediator, talk to your child about why practicing is so important. And tell us some more about why it's so important that it take place during those hours and what you need out of a schedule during a day. And child, talk to your parent, tell them, what are you feeling when it gets loud, when your parent is practicing? Like, what do you need to be able to really participate in your classes and to be able to do your homework in a good way? And so you have this conversation. Everybody is or you're hoping that everybody is open-minded about it. You generate as many at the end of coming up with all the interests, you generate as many options as you can and then go through the solution. So maybe one of the solutions at the end is, parent needs to have 4 hours of practice time, and the best times for the parent to practice is between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Kids going to school from 9 to 11 and then has a break in there for about an hour and a half, and then again until 3 o'clock. Well, can parents start a little bit earlier and break the practice session up into some segments? Can we get some really good headphones, noise canceling headphones for kid while he's on the computer doing his remote learning? And so the whole idea is to create more conversation to come up with a solution. Now consider that you are you're in your workplace, and this probably won't apply so much to COVID, but let's pretend that we all get to, we're back at work in our actual offices, and you have an office mate who is just really, really loud. And you are the HR person, and some other employees come to you and say, he chomps his gum and blows bubbles all day, or she chomps their gum, they blow bubbles all day, they talk and laugh really loud on the phone all day, and it's really disturbing the rest of us. Rather than going to the person and saying, hey, you need to shut up, which is just going to probably shut him down and make him angry or her angry, the way to handle it now is to use these techniques that we've been talking about. And so you bring in a couple of the people who are either together, or you bring them in separately, people who are concerned and the person, and you share, what are you experiencing? What are the things you want to use? You want everybody to use I statements. So, when I hear somebody chomping a gum, it really makes me cringe and I can't focus. When I hear a booming laugh, it interrupts me while I'm on the telephone, I lose my frame of reference, and I have to start over with the client conversation. So again, you're going through active listening, trying to facilitate an engaged conversation between the people, using your reframing and your reality testing, and then moving into option generating and solutioning. So those are a couple examples that are pretty common now and before and after COVID.
Thanks so much, Erin, for
Welcome.
sharing all this good info with us.